are the Arabs? What unites them? What divides them? There are 160 million people who call themselves Arabs. They live in not one, but 21 sovereign states, strung across Asia and Africa, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Arabian Gulf. They are not a distinct race. There are black Arabs and white Arabs. They do not share the same religion. There are Muslim Arabs and Christian Arabs. Fourteen centuries ago, the answer to the question, who are the Arabs, would have been simple. They were the people who lived in the Arabian Peninsula and spoke Arabic. A century later, inspired by the new religion of Islam, they had become the rulers of a vast empire, stretching from Spain to Persia. In time, the majority of people within that empire converted to Islam. And from Morocco to Iraq, Arabic gradually replaced the languages used before, becoming equally the language of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Our films show the Arab past as it still informs the life and imagination of Arabs today. The tensions between a proud history and a recent past of deep disappointment inspire the questions that the Arabs continuously ask of themselves. In this first film, we will travel to the four corners of the Arab world to seek the meaning of Arabness and the deep sources that sustain it. We begin in Beirut, the city where I grew up. Since 1965, when I went to America to study, I have been one of Lebanon's many prodigal sons, returning annually to visit family and friends. In the last 100 years, we Lebanese have become almost notorious for our inability to stay put. Recently, the wars which have ravaged our country have forced many of us to live abroad, to become Lebanese who visit Lebanon.
كيفك؟
كيفك أنت؟
هاي. هاي.
خالو مامي خالو.
every year in recent history has left such a savage mark on the familiar places and the faces. Beirut has to be known all over again. My father and mother survived the latest season of destruction in Beirut alone. All of their 7 children were outside Lebanon, scattered wide, in Britain, Nigeria, Greece, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. Until the civil war of 1975, they had lived in Beirut close to their parents. Through civil war and invasion, my father opened his shop every day. Despite everything, he held firm to the rhythms of normality.
جاي نزورك ونصور جديدة. كيف الحال؟ كيف؟ كيفك عمرك منيح؟ كيفك؟ يا
Our family comes from the town of Marjayoun in South Lebanon. We always belong here, no matter what distance or absence has intervened.
لولو فوق مرحبا
كيف الحال؟ بتعرفوا؟ لا ما كيف الفؤاد مسلم بدي اقول لك مرتين 3 من فؤاد مسلم كيف الحال؟
Nowadays, Marjayoun is newsworthy as a base for the Haddad militia, the private army organized by Israel to control South Lebanon.
خربان الصحة؟ عم بيصوركم شو بدي اعمل انا هو عارف فجأة اني جاي لولو عرفتي مين انا؟ انا باسم
باسم
باسم بن فؤاد
يا هلا يا هلا كيفك؟
The family house is occupied by a Haddad militiaman and his family.
عمري اللي عمر ما شفتك. هذا ابن صاحب البيت عندكم.
اللي اجى هو الدكتور.
اللي اجى اللي ما هو الدكتور.
ابوه اللي اجى هو الدكتور.
جربت مكانته. هذا باسم المهم هذا.
Political turmoil has been the story of the Middle East for more than 60 years. My father was born here in 1918, the year when the map of the region was changed irrevocably, and the foundations were laid for the conflicts that still rage today. Until 1918, no borders had separated this region for hundreds of years. Haifa and Tripoli, Beirut and Damascus, Jerusalem and Jericho shared a common geography and common culture. For 400 years, this region had been the Syrian provinces of the Ottoman Empire. It remained so even as the Ottoman Empire slowly shrank under the pressure of new European empires and modern nationalisms. By the first decade of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire had become principally an empire of Arabs and Turks. From their capital, Istanbul, the Ottoman authorities tried desperately to preserve the empire by a policy of increased centralization and Turkification. After 400 years of coexistence, the difference in language between Arab and Turk became profoundly significant. Arab nationalism began as a defense of Arabic language and culture. A 100 years ago, a man of Damascus or Beirut might have called himself a Muslim or a Christian, an Ottoman, a Syrian, but it is unlikely he would have called himself an Arab. Arab identity as we know it today developed in the 20th century. In 1914, war broke out in Europe. The Turks entered the war on the side of Germany, and the Middle East became a battleground. The war forced the Syrian Arabs to choose between the Ottoman state and Arab independence. The decision divided many families. Turkish execution of Arabs in Beirut and Damascus helped harden opinion against the Turks. The Arab Revolt of 1916 finally transformed the cultural protest movement into a national uprising. The Arab leaders were encouraged by British promises of support for an independent Arab state. By 1918, the Turks had been defeated, and the British and their Arab allies entered major cities of the region. It seemed the time had arrived for Arab independence. Instead, Britain and France divided the region between themselves, slashing artificial boundaries across the map of geographical Syria. And so the Syrian Arabs entered the world of European rule, which other Arab peoples, Egyptians, Algerians, had long before experienced. These new mandates were controlled for a generation by Britain and France. But when the age of European empire was brought to an end by the Second World War, they gained their independence as individual Arab states. All except one, Palestine. In Palestine, British rule was committed to the establishment of a Jewish homeland. By 1948, the hundreds of thousands of Zionist Jewish settlers who had moved to Palestine were strong enough to defeat the larger Arab population in war. They created the new state of Israel. The states first created by the British and the French now have their own armies, governments, and institutions, their own national identities and interests. The Lebanese can still celebrate their Independence Day in Beirut. But it is an independence of hope, not reality. The events of 1918 and 1948 still cast a dark shadow over the region. The conflicts generated then remain unresolved. At the time of this parade, Lebanon was occupied by the armies of Israel and Syria. Soldiers from Europe and America were trying to keep the peace in Beirut. Private militias held more power in much of the country than the government. A government trying to rebuild the Lebanese state on the rubble of civil war and invasion. Tarif Khalidi has been a friend for 20 years.
Well, we have to get rid of the French at some point, don't we?
I don't think you're going to ever get rid of the French.
We go to Martyrs Square for the first time since the Civil War began in 1975. It used to be the bustling heart of Beirut.
Since this was supposed to represent the martyrs of the First War.
Right. But I don't think they should touch it. I really don't think they should touch it at all. I mean, they shouldn't plug the holes in it, is what I mean. The hand of this guy, Shaif, has fallen off.
Incredible.
Makes him look like a Roman emperor or something.
Yeah.
The wars that have ravaged Lebanon have much to do with the fact that the various Lebanese groups have failed to solve some essential internal problems of modern statehood. But they are unlikely to have a real chance to do so successfully, as long as the whole area remains caught in the turmoil which the events of 1918 and 1948 generated. The problems of statehood and sovereignty should be settled with justice. Otherwise, Lebanese, Palestinians, Syrians, and Israelis will continue to live under conditions of conflict without any real chance of development towards truly humane societies. Miraculously, although its old commercial heart has been torn from it, Beirut is still alive, even vibrant. In the 19th and 20th century, Beirut's institutions of learning and journalism played a central role in the Arab cultural renaissance. And it is in Beirut that some of the major intellectual and political battles of the Arabs have been fought. It is here, for example, that the name of Gamal Abdel Nasser is still evoked. Nasser is a central figure in the story of Arabism. Perhaps no other modern Arab political figure can be compared with him. Nasser's first concern in the 1940s and early 1950s, and the concern of all Egyptians, was the expulsion of the British from Egypt. But the potential for Arabism had been there all along, in the shared memory of a gloriously united Arab civilization, as well as in the bitter experience of European colonial rule, which most Arab peoples suffered. In the 1950s, Cairo became the major center of the anti-colonial struggle in the Arab world and Africa. The Algerian National Liberation Front had set up its political headquarters there. France was obsessed with Algeria, Britain with its fading imperial glory, Israel with any sign of Arab strength. And they conspired to strike and topple the Nasser regime in 1956. The spectacle of French, Israeli, and British troops being forced to withdraw from Egypt increased Nasser's influence and popularity.
What he did not realize that by this very act of defying the West, he was galvanizing the rest of the Arab world. He did not count on it, he did not anticipate it, but it happened. And when it happened, he began to realize in a very dramatic way that there is something that explains his early feelings of Arabism. He began to realize that here is a potential force that could definitely be utilized, mobilized, not only for Egyptian interest, but for the interest of his fight against colonialism and against imperialism.
Egypt had emerged as the champion of pan-Arab nationalism. In 1958, the creation of the United Arab Republic of Egypt and Syria consummated these developments. It is impossible to understand the present-day mood of political frustration, defeatism, and impotence among Arabs without reference to the climate of political optimism only 20 years ago. But the union of Egypt and Syria lasted 3 years. And after Israel attacked and utterly defeated the armies of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan in 1967, the combined forces of Israel, the West, and the anti-Nasser Arabs succeeded in containing Egypt and introduced into Egyptian politics the fateful seeds of retreat from Nasser's Arab policies. Nasser died in 1970. 6 million Egyptians and other Arabs marched in his Cairo funeral. At the greatest moment of his life, in November 1956, he went to Cairo's great Azhar Mosque to speak to his people.
شعارنا أننا سنقاتل ولن نسلم. ده شعار كل فرد في القوات المسلحة وده شعار كل فرد في الشعب. هنقاتل. أنا هنا في القاهرة ضد أي غزو سأقاتل معاكم. أنا هنا موجود في القاهرة. ولادي موجودون معاكم في القاهرة، ما طلعتهمش بره ومش هطلعهم بره. وأنا موجود معاكم هنا في القاهرة. هنقاتل زي ما قلت لكم امبارح لآخر نقطة دم. لن نسلم أبدا. بنبني بلدنا، نبني تاريخنا، بنبني مستقبلنا.
The Azhar, a mosque and a university, is at the heart of Cairo, a living monument to the historical traditions common to all Arab societies.
ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون.
Although not all Arabs are Muslims, Islam has a special place in Arab history and culture. The founder of Islam was the Prophet Muhammad, who proclaimed he was the messenger of God's word, as previously revealed to Abraham, Moses, and Jesus.
Allahu Akbar.
Every year Muslims make pilgrimage to Mecca, a place which Muslims associate with Abraham, the patriarch of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It was here that the Prophet Muhammad was born about 1400 years ago, and where he began his mission. The faith revealed to Muhammad in Mecca equipped the Arabs for one of the most remarkable achievements in history. They founded a state and conquered a vast empire. Within that empire, a new world civilization was created. Within a century, the Arab Islamic Empire occupied the center of the known world. The area of the early Arab conquests is basically the area of the modern Arab world, with the exception of Spain and Iran. The Arabs built their first great monument in Jerusalem. Within a generation of the Prophet's death, they moved their capital from Medina to Damascus. The Great Umayyad Mosque at first shared the site of a Christian church, which itself had been built on the site of a Roman temple. The Arabs ruled in Damascus for 100 years. Then the capital was moved to Baghdad, a new city founded near the site of ancient Babylon. Arab Islamic civilization was built on the foundations of the great civilizations of the Middle East which had preceded it. The civilizations of the Babylonians and Pharaohs, Assyrians and Persians, the Greeks and Romans. The Arab Islamic Empire started to lose central control very early. But it was precisely in the period of endless political upheaval that Arab Islamic civilization took its mature classical form. Political fragmentation had little effect on the vigorous growth of Arab culture, especially in the cities. Places like Damascus, Baghdad, Fez, and Cairo. In the 20th century, Arabness as a cultural identity has fared much better than its political manifestations. It is a great paradox that today the Arab world is much more solidly integrated, economically, socially, and culturally, than it ever was in Nasser's time. Political Arabism peaked too soon. Through language and education, Arabic culture continues to form the personality and outlook of an ever-increasing number of Arabs. For the Arabs, poetry is the most effective form of self-expression.
فنذهب فيها كجرحين في جرس مثقل يعبران الجبال إلى القدس.
مفتاح آخر دار فلم يفتح، دارت كل مفاتيح الدنيا لم يفتح، لكن يدا حانية طرقت، سقط الباب وذابت حبات القلب.
لعروس النيل بعلا جاء يفتض بكارات الدياجي حاملا شعرا حزينا وأساطير ليال هرمات. إن في صلبها ما بين الترائب بذرة الوعد.
ولا نصغي لقول الإله، موعدنا موت وشطآننا يأس، ألفناه رضينا به بحرا جليديا حديد المياه، نعبره نمضي إلى منتهى، نمضي ولا نصغي لذاك الإله. تقنا إلى رب جديد سواه.
وبعدين لما بدأوا يبنوا كان عبري يعني بالعربي كان عبري فظيع يعني كان
Gamal al-Ghitani, an Egyptian writer, shows me his Cairo. The neighborhood of the Azhar where he grew up. For 1,000 years, merchants from all over the Arab world came to Cairo for their trade. Scholars and artists have produced work here that has influenced Arabs everywhere.
لا شكرا خلينا واقفين الكرسي ده قاعد عليه اولاد صغار نفس وضعه حتى نفس وضع
20th century Cairo has played an equally important role. By far the most popular Arab artist of the first half of the 20th century was the Egyptian singer Kulthum. Egyptian books, films, television programs, and music are consumed by all speakers of Arabic.